Ian, it is such a pleasure to meet you and learn more about this incredible exhibition. You've been quite involved with researching the history and telling the story of the Zulu kingdom and the Anglo-Zulu War. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I've been a historian and author researching and writing about Zulu history, particularly the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, for something like 40 years now. And I've done a lot of research in the field in KwaZulu-Natal and in archives in the UK and in South Africa. And during that time, I've written a number of books. The most successful one is a book called Zulu Rising, which is about the battles of iSandlwana and Rorke. But I've also written a book called The Anatomy of the Zulu Army, in which I look at exactly this kind of stuff that I'm sitting here surrounded by. And then I've written numerous other books on Zulu culture and other aspects of the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War.
Wow, so 40 years with numerous books being published. I mean, obviously you're very knowledgeable, but you're also very passionate about this history. What drew you into learning about the Anglo-Zulu War?
My personal interest in the Anglo-Zulu War started at a young age when I was a young kid living near Brighton on the south coast in the UK, and my parents took me to see a film called Zulu, which was, 1964? And I remember sitting in the audience there looking up at this big wide screen, and right at the beginning of it, there's an opening sequence. Obviously, I knew nothing about it at the time, but it focuses on the Battle of iSandlwana, and it's just a very short sequence, and there are dead redcoat soldiers strewn around the African veldt, and the Zulus come in and pick up their weapons and sort of shake them at the camera. And I remember as a kid growing up in the 1960s, which was a sort of time of lots of sociological change in the UK, and you'd been brought up in a fairly conservative view of British history and the British past, and just seeing this sequence even as a kid and thinking, gee, that's really strange, that's really dramatic, what on earth has happened here? We're not supposed to, as the British, lose battles like this. What are all these soldiers doing dead? And in a way, that's the question that's kind of dominated my life ever since, trying to figure out what was going on there. And I think I've come to the conclusion that really that Battle of iSandlwana is hugely important in certainly British colonial history, but I would also argue African history in terms of resistance to colonialism, because this was a moment when an African kingdom defending itself hit back at the invaders and actually wiped them out. And still today, that battle as a symbol that a robust African power, yeah, they may have been mainly armed with shields and spears, like you see around me here, but actually they could still fight back, and they could still give the invaders a bloody nose. And I think that that's important ideologically to this day, and it's just a fascinating, dramatic piece of history. And having the twist for me is that having become interested in it at an early age, much later, when I was writing about it, I discovered I have a personal family connection in that a actually rather distant uncle of mine was killed at the Battle of iSandlwana. So he was one of those redcoats lying on the battlefield there. And this to me, yeah, it's kind of one of those spooky fate things that's just made me feel that this is my direction in life and this is what I've got to spend my time doing.
I think that's really amazing, because I remember watching Zulu for the first time as a young boy growing up in the 1990s, and it gave me chills back then, and it still gives me chills today watching it. But it makes sense that this movie would then be part of your exhibition, as I understand you have a number of items related to it, because for many of us, that was how we were exposed to this history for the first time. And the movie wasn't only entertaining or educational, but it did make you sit back a bit and reflect on that history and maybe think about it a bit differently from how we've been taught it.
Particularly for a film that was made in the early 1960s, it's quite challenging. You know, it's saying, you British guys, you don't walk over everybody without consequences. Sometimes it goes the other way. And actually look at these people you were fighting. Should you really have been there? Should you have been fighting these people who have this whole warrior ethic all of their own? And in lots of ways, of course, this clash is what we're talking about in the exhibition, is the clash of two different warrior traditions. But for a movie made in the 1960s, that was really quite a progressive view, and it's thought-provoking. It gets a lot of people wondering about their assumptions about British imperialism and about African societies, the African ability to resist imperialism, and I think it's only a good thing in all of those regards. And that history would have only just been out of touch then. You know, there wouldn't have been any survivors around, but there were certainly children of survivors around. And the other interesting thing about the film is that the Zulu king Cetshway in the movie is played by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who of course went on from the 60s onward to become a very prominent South African politician, leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party, Minister of the Interior in the first free government in South Africa. Still, he's 95, I think now, but still active in promoting Zulu tradition and all the rest of it. And he was related, I think his great-grandfather was King Cetshway. So he's playing his own ancestor in the movie. And there is then really quite a close connection between the Zulu perspective of it. Now, it is a film that doesn't really, in terms of the narrative, engage much with the Zulu perspective, because you are looking at the white characters who are on the receiving end of the Zulu attacks, as it were. But at the same time, those white characters are saying, hey, look, what are we doing here? What's the point of us being in Africa? And there's a distinct sort of feeling that the film is saying, well, the Zulus belong here, we don't. You know, we stand out in our bright red, fantastic cinematography, bright red tunics against the magnificent African veldt and the skyline. But the Zulus are always depicted rising up out of the grass or coming over the hill. They are an extension of Africa itself because they belong there. And lo and behold, well, who's in the movie? The great-grandson of King Cetshway himself playing his forebear. So yeah, it is quite closely kind of keyed in to the real, a much closer understanding of the history than we are today, certainly.
So Ian, can you tell us a little bit more about what types of objects will be on display, and what exactly is the scope of history that you intend to cover in this exhibition?
So this exhibition is called Clash of Empires, and it's the focus is on the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War between the British invading Zululand and the Zulus defending Zululand. But we do look very much at the context of that. So we start earlier with the rise of the Zulu kingdom under King Shaka and the arrival of the first white settlers, which of course is the genesis and the origin of the conflict between the two sides. And we look at I suppose, the development of the British colony of Natal adjacent to Zululand, what leads to the clash in 1879, the battles that take place. And then we follow the consequences through. So we come through the immediate post-conflict period, but that sees a greater emphasis on breaking up the Zulu royal house and beginning to colonize Zululand itself. And the last act of armed resistance in 1906, which was the last armed uprising against this kind of rolling out of a colonial administration, essentially by the British. And then we look a little bit at the impact of it. Why is it still remembered? The role of films in popular imagination in conjuring up this history and sort of recasting it in different forms for modern audiences. And yeah, the whole thing is a mesh of written postal artifacts. So we have a lot of handwritten documents and photographs and postal covers, but then supported by a very wide range of physical artifacts. The largest range of physical artifacts connected with the Anglo-Zulu War that I think has ever been assembled. It's possible maybe somebody did something in the 19th century that we don't have a record of, but certainly in modern times, this is the biggest exhibition looking at a single conflict like this and engaging with both perspectives, the British and the Zulu perspective. So we're quite proud of the fact that it's got a wide range to it and a depth of subject matter, but hopefully also an even-handedness in the way that we're looking at the history.
What do you think about the idea of using postal ephemera, letters, envelopes, postal markings on stamps in an exhibition such as this? I mean, this is taking place at the Royal Philatelic Society, London, so there is a postal emphasis within this history. Is this something you knew a lot about walking into?
I have to say that the postal thing was a kind of mysterious world to me before I got involved in this. I'm much more used to the physical artifacts. But it has actually been really interesting looking at we've got so many bits of postal history, things posted in the field from Zululand, comments from politicians saying, oh, I think we might have some issues here that's going to lead to conflicts. We've got handwritten letters from various Zulu kings. The first Zulu king who learned to write was King Cetshway, who was the man who opposed the British invasion and, of course, was then captured by the British at the end of the war. And he was taught in captivity to write his name. He couldn't write fluently, but he could write his autograph. And his autograph was highly sought after by people who used to visit him in captivity. Oh, I've got the autograph of the Zulu king. Well, his son, King Dinuzulu, who also carried the torch of rebellion against the British, and he was a much younger man, and he rebelled in 1888 and was sent to St. Helena, which of course was the great British political prison. We sent Napoleon there after his capture. And whilst King Dinuzulu was on St. Helena, he learnt to write fluently in both English and isiZulu, the Zulu language. And we've got letters in both languages written by him, some of them sort of relevant to his subsequent experiences and his involvement in all of this history. So it became actually an unexpected pleasure to me. I have to say I came into it as an artifact man thinking, oh, bits of paper, they're not so interesting. But actually, it's really quite cool to look at the postal marks and the stamps and all the rest of it. You can say, well, look, this letter was actually sent from Zululand. This is where it's gone to. Fast forward, we've got letters from King Dinuzulu sent. At one point, he was in jail in South Africa, and we've got a letter written to the jailer by him in his own handwriting of the jail that he's at. And suddenly, for me, that's opened up the whole world of postal history in a way that it hadn't been before. And what I'm hoping, as somebody who is not principally a philatelist, is that some of the artifacts will draw in people who have an interest in the history. Maybe they've seen the movies, maybe they've read a book. And the physical stuff will be an obvious attraction to them, but they'll come along and think, oh, look at all these interesting letters. There's a wealth of interest coming out of those as well. And with our guiding principle throughout the whole thing here, look how they've been meshed together. Now, I've not particularly curated the way they're blended together. Somebody else has done that. But actually, terrific. We've got a letter from somebody talking about something, and there we've got an artifact that physically relates to that. And what I'm hoping is that people then will understand, the way that these things all tie together, and both of them contribute to so much more being taken out of each individual aspect of the collection. Now, of course, we do have a number of physical artifacts with direct provenances linking them to this actual story. But it's often very difficult when you're studying artifacts to pin a provenance down 100%. You can get background information, you can draw conclusions. Well, yeah, this was probably there and brought back by so-and-so or whatever. But they don't physically have that provenance very often associated with them. One of the things about written and postal artifacts is that's exactly what they do have. They're often dated and signed and addressed from where they're sent. So you've actually got it in somebody's verifiable handwriting that's where they were at that particular moment on that particular day. And one of the things that we have in this collection is undeniably the largest collection of letters from British officers who fought in Zululand. We've got, for example, a letter from Lieutenant Gonville Brumhead, who commanded the company at Rorke's Drift during the battle, and he's actually written this letter. It's addressed from Rorke's Drift after the battle. We've got a letter from Lieutenant Chard, who was the senior officer at Rorke's Drift, again written from Zululand, not actually at Rorke's Drift, but a little bit later in the war. We've got letters from Lord Chelmsford, the senior British commander, written from Zululand. Generals Wood and Buller, who played a very prominent part. All of these people actually writing dispatches or private letters home. And, they wrote them there on that day, and they've addressed it Rorke's Drift or wherever, Ulundi. And it's gone back to the UK. So it's a snapshot of time taken out of that direct context there in a way that you can't often tie directly to physical artifacts.
Ian, this has been really great. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to not only going and seeing these items and exploring them further, but I'm also looking forward to meeting you and discussing more about the Anglo-Zulu War and Zulu Kingdom history, because I just find it absolutely fascinating. Can you just share for all the viewers when, where, and how to attend this amazing exhibition?
The exhibition is called Clash of Empires. It's being held at the Royal Philatelic Society in London, which is right near Bank Tube Station. It's very easy to find. And it's going to be on from the 1st to the 31st of July. So it's basically the whole of July. I think it's not open on Sundays, but every other day it'll be open. And it's free to get in. So anybody can come in and have a look and hopefully find it interesting and enjoy it. There are a number of presentations and lectures going on throughout that month. I shall be there quite a lot of the time. I'll be talking, but I'll be showing people around. Hopefully I'll be meeting people. And you can find more information at www.clashofempires.org. So if you've enjoyed this, do come along, and hopefully I'll meet you sometime then, and we'll have a great time.